Hello again. A recent ruling by the judge at an employment tribunal in Britain was both quite shocking and also wholly predictable. A black man working for a company whose employees felt that conditions of labour were akin to slavery was apparently traumatised when one of them scribbled the graffito "slave" on a piece of machinery. Although this was a protest against the situation in the place of work, he interpreted it as being a racist slur, and so brought a case for racial harassment. Ruling in his favour, the employment judge said, "The term slave will, we find, evoke in contemporary English speakers the enslavement of black people. All right-thinking people regard slavery as a monstrosity. Mr. Fafana, an evidently proud black man, feels the evil of slavery viscerally. That is understandable and respectable. We accept his sense of hurt at the graffito is genuine." The subject of slavery has in recent years become quite literally a question of black and white. Upon hearing any mention of slavery, the mind of the average person in Britain or America turns unbidden and as a matter of course to the Atlantic slave trade, by means of which many black Africans were transported from their native continent to America and the islands of the Caribbean. For most of us, this is simply what slavery was: the historic mistreatment and exploitation of black people. This is quite odd when you come to think about it. Don't take my word for it, though. Go and look round any bookshop or library and find a section on slavery. You will find that almost every single book is concerned solely with the transatlantic slave trade, the triangular trade, and hardly any of those books will actually contain information about any other sort of slavery. As soon as you see that definite article, as in the slave trade, you know this is about black people being enslaved by whites. 50 years ago, the idea that any discussion of slavery should be inextricably linked to the transportation of black Africans across the Atlantic to the New World would have struck most people as bizarre. Mention of slavery would, in the 1960s, have been as likely to evoke thoughts of Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers, or the ancient Israelites labouring in Egypt, as it would the so-called triangular trade. The word slavery might have conjured up for a British schoolchild in the 1960s an image of the ancient Hebrews in bondage before they were led across the Red Sea to freedom by Moses. Familiarity with the Bible was far more common in those days than now, and everybody knew about the stories of slavery found in the Old Testament. Slavery was a universal custom across the whole of the Middle East from the very earliest civilisations, which explained its ready acceptance in the major religions to arise in that region, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The same was true of other parts of the world. In India, slavery was certainly common by the beginning of the 1st century AD, and probably as early as the time of the Buddha in the 6th century BC. There is reason to suppose that slavery was widespread in the earliest Chinese culture, the Shang dynasty, which flourished for about 700 years from the 17th century BC onward. On the other side of the world, in North and South America, captured enemies from other countries or cultural groups were seen as being natural candidates for slavery. The Maya followed this rule, as did the Aztecs, and also the tribes of North America. In Alaska, there lived two tribes who were very energetic and enthusiastic slave traders. whose raids extended all the way along the Pacific coast as far south as California. The Haida and Tlingit tribes both had fearsome reputations and routinely carried off men and women, taking them back to Alaska as slaves. The children of the slaves also became slaves, unlike the situation in some American tribes where children born to slaves might hope to become full members of the tribe. As a result, in some parts of the northwest Pacific coast, a quarter of the population were slaves. Long before the importation of African slaves to North America, slavery was flourishing among the indigenous inhabitants of the continent. The English, too, have plenty of experience of slavery. Indeed, their very identity, the use of the word English to describe their nation, is very closely bound up with the concept of their being enslaved. It's a story once familiar to every school child in England. The Venerable Bede, an ecclesiastical historian of the Anglo-Saxon period, related how in the late 6th century Pope Gregory passed a market in Rome where he noticed some beautiful children for sale. On inquiring their nationality, he was told they were Angles, meaning that they came from what is now England. He made a witty pun in Latin, saying, "Non Angli, sed Angeli," not Angles, but angels. It was after telling this anecdote that Bede began referring to the inhabitants of the southern part of Britain as English. The first recognition of the disparate collection of Saxons, Jutes, and so on who had settled among the Romanised Britons might actually have a national identity of their own. At the time of the Norman invasion in 1066, roughly 10% of the people in England were slaves, all of them white. By assuming that any mention of slavery must refer to black Africans rather than white English people, our own history is thus obscured and the idea of slavery appropriated by another culture. Slavery is also, as I said, an integral part of the history of the Jews, with the bondage in Egypt and the Exodus led by Moses marking their foundation of their identity as a separate people. This too must now take second place to the grievance narrative of Caribbean and African Americans. In this way, the historical origins of both the English and the Jews are airbrushed from history to ensure greater prominence for black people. I'm not at all sure quite how fair this is. I'm not a huge fan, as it happens, of cultural appropriation of this kind.